Well, it was my pleasure and a great opportunity to be able to travel to the country of Hungary. It's basically, I guess you could say, between France and Russia, if you want to be really general, or France and Ukraine. Just to give you a little bit of an idea, the country is pretty much on the 45th parallel latitude-wise, so it would be like the northern part of United States. It is pretty much sheltered far enough from water that it has a relatively seasonal climate. Just to give you a rough estimate, you're going to have your first frost in the fall sometime in October, and the last in the spring sometime in April. So not too much different than a lot of parts of the U.S. in that regard, but they do get about 22 inches of rainfall. And again, that can be more or less depending where you're at in the country, but that's the average rainfall. And they tend to get less over summer. So water issues are more on the dry side of trying to retain moisture. So that's just a little bit of a history of the country and where it's at, and some of the agriculture and so forth that's there. So one of the things that I quickly noticed was that plowing is a common sight. And I, as a no-till farmer, long-term no-till farmer, was quite amazed at the degree of plowing that was done. I don't think I have ever been to a place that I've saw so much moldboard plowing. This picture here is as far as you can see, and it even goes both sides, left and right. 90% of the fields are moldboard plowed. The crop that's not like winter wheat that's planted in the fall, of course, but before they're corn and sunflowers and so forth, it's plowed. And I did quickly find out that no-till meant no plowing, not necessarily no tillage. So that was one definition that I had to clarify, at least the way I used the word. And so just some of the nuances of when you travel to other countries and how the definitions are. This picture here, I think, really represents what I saw. You have your cover crop there on the right. On the left was obviously moldboard plowing. And in spite of the fact that there is a lot of tillage, the interest is certainly and clearly growing when it comes to talking about cover crops and no-till. The first farm that, maybe I'll back up a little bit and say that I went there for the first ever soil health conference ever held in the country of Hungary. And so that was a kind of a monumental foundation of there's enough interest now to hold a conference on that topic. And it was, my trip was arranged and set up, by a fellow who's also a part of our innovator group here, Sambor, which I'll show you a picture of him later, and he might be able to hop on the call here. Hopefully he can later. But we went to the very first farm. We visited 4 farms and 1 research facility. And I was told that he was hoping for a few farmers at each farm. We pulled in the driveway at the first farm, and it turned out to be 72 farmers. So I was surprised. He said he was shocked. So we got started off on a good note. And I'll just say that the 4 farms we visited, it was between 50 and 80 on each farm. So the interest, and I would have to say curiosity, is growing, no doubt about it, but just in the embryonic stage. It's just starting, which for me, I will say, created a little bit of a challenge, because the knowledge and experience of how to do cover crops there hasn't been a lot of it in the country. It's only been 2 or 3 years that they even really had cover crops. So just starting very basic and trying to, in essence, share that it is possible to use cover crops and still grow a cash crop. Some of those simple fundamental things that I have experienced to be successful, you kind of got to step back in order to go through the process. Where do you start and what do you do? How do you do it? But any of you who have seen me in action, I always have a shovel with me and I'm always digging, and they kind of started joking about it later on about me going to the field and digging. I will say that the soil to me seemed very good. So I think there's a lot of potential there to take it up to the next level in regards to soil health and so forth. And so just explaining, digging and explaining, showing earthworms, and which we did find a few, but just explaining how the different cover crops work and so forth was what my role was, is in order to kind of stimulate the interest in cover crops and help them know how to use it. And my first shovelful in the country of Hungary did yield an earthworm, which was kind of nice. I will say that not all shovelfuls of dirt did I find them, so they were definitely there. But just explaining how that's important as an indicator of soil health and how earthworms can benefit them in order to be able to reduce tillage, and just go over some of those kind of fundamental basics of what cover cropping can do. So it was in a way very gratifying for me to experience this, but then to help explain what the different functions of different cover crops are. And I still think no matter where you guys are and what you're doing, if you're a farmer or if you're an educator, you can't forget the basics. And of course, new things are being developed all the time with cover crops, new species and so forth. But don't forget some of the basics, because there's always new farmers coming on. I just have a neighbor here that's very close to me who knows me well but has not been a cover crop farmer, and just recently came to me asking me some very basic questions. And so don't take for granted, just because a large part of your area is using cover crops, that everyone knows what you think they may know. So Sambor's company is Demeter. There you can see the sign there. They had some field trials with different cover crop mixes. And I was pleased to see that was occurring already. And this was just really good to be able to walk through the different mixes and to be able to explain the rationale behind some of these mixes, and pretty much that the whole movement in cover crops is pretty much gravitating toward mixes. But I also said to you, and I say this still all the time, that if you really want to experience cover crops, planting a radish is one of the best ways to experience the dynamics of what a cover crop can do in 1 year. So emphasizing that if mixes confuse you, you want to use a radish would be a good way to start, as long as you're in the planting window of when that radish needs to be planted. Some of the things that were, I guess you'd say, reinforced to me and what I came home with is the need to expand the species here in my area of influence. And one of the species that I saw again was lupins. I really like lupins, and I've played around with them for probably 10 years now. One of the things I like is it's a unique legume in that it requires its own specific inoculant. A pea inoculant or a vetch inoculant won't work on lupins, but it is a legume, so it produces nitrogen. And I actually saw this selection that I'm holding here was a different selection of lupin that I had seen before. The seeds, instead of being round, as I had known lupin seeds, similar to a pea, the seeds were a little flat. And so it seemed to be a bigger, more aggressive plant. And so I was there to learn as well, and I think there could be some selection here of certain species that may be good. Lupins always do have a nice taproot to them. It's an erect legume, meaning it can grow straight up and won't go in the ground like a pea or a vetch will. So adding lupins into a mix is good to help some of those other legumes stay upright, because they will grow better if they're allowed to trellis on something else. Of course, you can have cereal rye or other things that a viney legume could trellis, but that's always a good thing. And we talk about synergism in cover crops. To have a couple selections of erect legumes is always a good thing to have in that mix. And lupins tend to kill about the mid-teens, same as a radish pretty much. And so they can grow, into the winter. And so it gives us a decent amount of growing time. The next one I want to highlight is Phacelia. And every time I go to Europe, I always come back resolute to use more of it. It's very popular over there. It's in the top 5 of the popular cover crops. It's basically put in every mix that you can plant there in the fall. Its claim to fame is 2 things. It enhances soil aggregation. In the picture there, straight below the words, you can see some of the fine root hairs that are growing even near the soil surface. And if you're trying to transition a soil that's been beat up by tillage, if you did like a waterway or something like that, or did some work in your fields or whatever, you want to use Phacelia to be able to get that soil aggregation back as quick as possible. Again, it's kind of a unique species. It's not a legume. It's not a grass. You can see a picture of it there on the right. But its claim to fame is how it attracts beneficial insects when the nice purple flower comes out. And you can plant it very early in the spring, as soon as you can get in the ground, if you have that option. Actually, I was share a little bit before we started recording this that I just planted some cover crops here at the end of November. And I did one of my last passes, I threw in some Phacelia to see if it's going to survive. Because now, as late as we are in the end of November here, it may survive and grow next spring. I've done this a couple times, but the other window of opportunity is to plant in later in the summer. It grows into the fall. It loves cooler weather. It doesn't do so good in the heat of summer. But when it does have a chance to bloom, you will attract bees like no other crop, and other beneficial insects as well. So again, I saw it there in Hungary, one of the ones that they're working, utilizing, and something, if you ever get a chance to use it, it would be fantastic, I think, to try. The other one that I really want to spend a little time here is fava beans. They, again, are very popular in Europe, and I saw them again. But just look at that picture there. The thing that stands out to me is, of course, you can see the nodules there. They're not cleaned off very well, but you can see them. But the roots, look at them roots, how the mycorrhizae is colonized around there, how all that little, I'll just call it soil particles are sticking to the roots. That's essentially the mycorrhizae effect. You can actually see it. And so they're very, very good hosts for mycorrhizae, and that's a good thing. But again, they're an erect legume that in some cases has shown to provide as much nitrogen in the fall as hairy vetch would. Now, hairy vetch tends to overwinter in most areas, but even if you'd plant hairy vetch early, a fava bean will probably outdo it with nitrogen production, because it will winter kill in a couple nights in the mid-teens. I like to say it's like the fall version of sun hemp. So fava beans, again, I came back, I got to just grow more of them here on my own farm. The big problem with fava beans is the seed size. The seeds are like 2 to 3 times the size of peas, at least normal seeds, although there's efforts being made to grow and use smaller seeded fava beans. I think if that occurs, if we can get some good varieties of smaller seeds, it will become more economical and become more popular as a cover crop. The other thing, too, that was very interesting, we had penetrometers with us, and we were able to check the soil to see where any hard pans were. And in this one field where there was some different cover crops. There was a clear hard pan at about 6 inches. Maybe it could have been an old plow pan. I don't know. But this is where you could clearly see the differences in radishes. And in this case, the oilseed radish is the one on the right, which has more of a branchy root system, and a tillage radish or a daikon type radish is on the left. And it was just clear where you have the genetics of a daikon type radish can penetrate down through hard pans better. Now that doesn't mean that an oil seed is no good, because it provides other benefits to the soil as well. So we're not saying one is necessarily better than the other, but if you're going after compaction, you want to focus on more of a cover crop daikon type radish. That's why we have to understand some of these species and what they can and cannot do. The oil seed has been known for potentially more nematode suppression and maybe even glucosinolate production and stuff like that. So, but I will say is that radish on the right is about half the price of the radish on the left. So what are you trying to accomplish? If you're trying to alleviate soil compaction with the radish, because you heard about it, your half price radish will cost you a lot more. And this is just a function of understanding what you're buying and what you have. So that was just one of the more vivid examples that I've seen for a while. We also stopped in to a place that was doing some research, and what they were doing here is research on cover crops with fertilizer and cover crops without fertilizer. The best view of this is kind of, I'll call it toward the middle there. That was actually cereal rye. That plot in the closest to us here had some fertilizer on it, and the plot in the back did not. But they were also testing the value of legumes planted. This is all in the context of growing potatoes here. This is a potato region, so a lot of this will get plowed down eventually. But it was just good to see that there's some research going on, and just identifying the effects of legumes and also fertilizer. That's something that I think we need to continue to fine tune wherever you're at. I feel personally, I'm very confident in saying that cover crops make fertilizer more efficient. To the degree that occurs, there's going to be a lot of variables, but it's nonetheless something that we need to keep looking at. So I was impressed with Sambor's company. He sells cover crop seeds and mixes. And for those of you who know my history and my development of the tillage radish and everything, it was just kind of nice to go over there and to be able to see it being used in that country. So, but more than that, just to see that the fledgling industry of cover cropping that is beginning in another country, and to be a part of that is actually an honor, and I really appreciated the opportunity. So some of the challenges that are clearly there that I saw was varying soil types, and I know that we all deal with this, but I got to tell you, I saw a field that I have never seen the dramatic difference in one field, and you can just see there the difference. And if I'd show you a close-up of the middle part, you would see that soil is darker, but it's all a sandy soil. And obviously you see where it's somewhat eroded there in the top right where it was eroded. But that's a stark difference there in soil health, soil quality, and soil fertility. So the question was, and I actually posted this picture on Facebook if you haven't seen it, and asked, what would you advise a farmer if you saw this? And we were out there in the field, and we had quite a bit of discussion. Every farmer has different things available to them. My first question was, do you have the availability of animal manure? And he had very little, just some sheep manure, not much at all. So that basically did not answer his question. Then the question was, and we had quite a conversation on, is this a place where it would pay to fertilize cover crops, or at least to fertilize the poor performing areas, which were very dramatic there? And I would say, yes, it is. This is where you would consider fertilizing. Now, obviously, there's undoubtedly probably nitrogen, but to take some soil tests there of the good parts versus the poorer parts would be very prudent to do, to be able to get a handle if that's exactly what it is, and to be able to apply those nutrients as needed. But and then the question is, well, if you fertilize a cover crop and spend the money, will you get that back? And our answer is yes, you probably will, because it's an investment. So we're trying to even up this field, many different factors. But I would also say that this was probably not the most ideal choice of cover crop here. It was pretty much straight mustard, which mustard is a decent cover crop, but there should have been some legumes here, and also some more grassy type, higher C to N ratio legumes. So this is one of my favorite pictures of the trip, because I think it's a kind of situation I just wish I could manage it for 5 or 10 years to see what I could do. But because this field is relatively poor, but I think with cover crops and good fertility management, you really could bring this around. So if any of you have any other ideas of what would you recommend for a field like this, if you were consulting that farmer, what would you recommend? Post it on Facebook or something. I wouldn't mind hearing, or when we're done here, maybe we can discuss it a little bit. But so anyway, there was just a couple things in my trip that I had never seen before like that. The other thing is, I had mentioned that this was the reason why I went there to speak at a meeting, and the room was literally packed, as you can see, and I would say pretty much rapt attention as I was speaking. It was kind of nice to have simultaneous translation, so it was very efficient. And had several different interviews there. The ag press seemed to be very interested, and I was happy to see that, because that's a part of it. And as I've experienced here in America, the ag press has been very friendly to cover crops and soil health, and I was just glad to experience it there as well. There was just another dynamic that I kind of had a laugh because it took me back 5 to 10 years ago, and that was different farmers bringing in their radishes to show me. I remember that happened frequently for me, like I said, 10 years ago, but some of these guys were just bringing them there and actually insisting that I keep them, which I couldn't, of course, bring it home, but it was just it just kind of brought back some good memories to me, and I just enjoyed that aspect of it. What they ended up doing with this radish is cutting it up and handing it out to people to eat, to taste it. And for those of you who don't know, these type of radishes can be eaten. And if you like radishes, that is, there can be a little bit of a zing to it, depending on several factors, but that's where this radish finally ended up. Also gone beyond the borders of Hungary. There was 2 gentlemen there that drove 5 hours from Serbia. And sometimes we just hear of these countries in the news or in history and so forth. But to have these guys walk up to you and say they're from Serbia, and they know enough English that we were able to talk a little bit. It was just really cool to be able to experience other countries that have an interest in cover crops. And I'll just mention one other fellow here, too, that literally drove 10 hours, I think around 700-800 miles, I believe, from Switzerland and from where we were located. And he was a gentleman I actually had met in the States here in 2012, he reminded me. But just to hear again about cover cropping and no-till in Switzerland. I mean, I think of Switzerland, I'm thinking of mountains. I'm thinking of the Alps. But Switzerland actually is one of the leaders in Europe for no-till and cover crop. So it was just good to reconnect with this guy. And another thing, for those of you who are on Facebook saw this picture. Now, depending on the settings of your computer or not, this is actually meeting till after dark, and I mean dark. We were out in the field, and the guys just wanted to keep talking. And just to see that kind of that kind of response. And it's like 35 degrees here. Now one day it was really cold and windy, and it was really chilly, but this wasn't like a warm, nice, cozy evening at all. But just to see that interest and to experience the enthusiasm and all the questions and everything was certainly, that was just stimulating to me. It just made me feel like it was worth my time to go and all that. And, yeah, this is just one of the farms where we showed up to, and only expecting a few people. And lo and behold, there's anywhere between 50 and 80 people at the 4 farms we showed up. And there was no free food given out. There was no gimmicks. It was just show up. We want to talk about cover crops, and they're there. And that, I think, was some of the highlights for me, just to experience that. So just in summary, my challenge to them simply was, let's try to get away from our intensive tillage, and let's try to use more cover crops. And I just want to also give a public thank you to Sambor, who is with me there, and he's just doing a fantastic job, I would say, paving the way for cover crop usage in that part of the world. And he's a part of our group here, and it was just good to be able to meet him and experience his enthusiasm and so forth. So that pretty much wraps up my portion. I'm sure you might have a few questions. I'm unmuting everybody now. If you want to ask a question, type in the chat or whatever. Be glad to hear from you. So does anyone have a question regarding my what I've shared about Hungary?
Hungary is part of the EU.
It is, yes, it is. There's kind of different. I don't fully understand. I think there's like a different ranking in some of the members, but just as also a bit of history, Hungary was a part of the former Soviet Union up until 1989, and after that, there definitely were dramatic changes that occurred for them for more freedom to farm and not a lot of freedom in a lot of other ways. But so yes, it is a part of the EU.
Did they talk about in 2020 the EU wants to be at 20% cover crops, and that they're going to subsidize that?
Yes, that was discussed. Currently, and this is it's interesting. It's a little complex, and I can't say I fully understand it. But currently, I heard anywhere from 5 to 10% of acres needed to be planted in a cover crop in the fall. Now that is, and again, it does vary by region, but it's typically in the month of September, October. Then in November, you can plow it all up. So I guess you'd say that's a start, but that's where I saw plows running everywhere. I saw 2 different fields where I saw 4 tractors and plows in the same field. I don't know. I lost track of how many plows I saw, but they're plowing everything up now. That's just what historically they've done. And that's going to be a challenge probably to be able to get them comfortable with less tillage. I'll give you a quick example. I said in the beginning I had to redefine no-till because I soon found out their definition of no-till meant no moldboard plowing. And this one guy said he tried to do no-till, and I think it was pretty legit no-till. And I said, well, was your planter set up for it? And again, it's through translation and everything, so sometimes it doesn't get, your thought doesn't get clearly communicated. But he indicated it was, and then when I went back to the farm, I asked to see his planter. And his row cleaners were basically a V metal thing. It wasn't any wheels on it at all, just to move away clods. And that planter was as conventional as I've ever seen a planter. That doesn't mean it couldn't work, but with residue, I can almost, assured him that you need to clean the row off, especially for what he was trying to do. So all these definitions and everything are important to understand. But so yeah, as far as that's why the room was packed. That's why everyone was coming, because they know that something is going to happen. It's going to be ramping up, and they've heard about cover crops from around the world, and that's why the huge interest. But for them, it's coming as essentially a mandate. And some of them are just looking at it, well, just tell me what I got to do, and I'll do it. Others are saying, well, I think this is a potential here to potentially reduce my nutrient applications, potentially to increase my soil water holding capacity, which is what they're looking for. And that's what I tried to focus on, not just to plant cover crops just because the government tells you to, but to be able to utilize them and so forth. So great question there, Mark. Other questions? Do you have a question, Cliff?
No, that was answered on the tillage part of it. How to get that through to them, that was going to be crucial.
Yeah, and I'll just mention that I drove to 100 miles to the west and 100 miles then to the south. No, 100 miles to the east and 100 miles southwest, of Budapest. So I got to see approximately 200 miles of farmland collectively, and it's gently rolling, as you saw some of the pictures. I didn't see any real steep areas. So soil erosion is not a huge concern. Wind erosion is more of a concern. And they're both, of course, detrimental. But that's just because of the lower rainfall and so forth. That's just where they're at. And this is where cover crops can help, especially in the fall and over winter sometimes when you don't have snow cover, that wind doesn't just blow away that soil. Other questions? Anybody?
What is their typical rotation then?
Well, the top 4 or 5 crops would be winter wheat, oilseed rape, sunflowers, and corn. There's a few people starting to try some soybeans. So that's becoming, that's kind of like, I guess you would say the most cover crop that's advancing. They do have a little shorter growing season because of their latitude a little further north, it's kind of like on the latitude of the Dakotas. It doesn't get as cold there as the Dakotas would for comparison, but latitude-wise and day length and all that stuff, you can kind of associate that there. So soybeans are starting to come in. And I'll just make a comment. This one guy, his soybean field, he had it all disc up, and I was like, why did you disc this? And he said, because that's what we do. And I said, well, this is an opportunity after soybeans where it's easier to no-till. Well, that was a new concept. So hopefully next year at least try it. I told him next year at least try it on a couple passes. So, other questions? I'm going to open it up to any question at all, if you have any, beyond just this topic here. I wanted to also let us know that next week what our topic's going to be, managing herbicides and growing cover crops. How do you think about the herbicides you use when you grow cover crops? This is a picture of one of our members, Lauren Steinlegge, in his farm. So it's definitely an important topic that I want to cover next week. But so yeah, any other question any of you have on anything, any cover crop topic? Of course, if something about Hungary, feel free. But any other cover crop question, anything you heard about this past week or you want to ask?
Okay.
Anyone have a question?
Steve, I just got back from Romania and Bulgaria about 10 days ago.
Okay, just south of Hungary. Yeah.
Yes, they butt up together.
Yeah.
I mainly spoke to conferences and to producers, but I didn't get out on the farmland much at all.
Okay.
And there's a huge desire to change.
Mm-hmm.
They just don't know how to change.
Well, I think that's accurate from what I experienced as well. Is there any other things that you would like to just share that you noticed or heard that would be helpful to understand?
The soybeans were only planted under irrigation because of the dry July and August. Essentially, they don't get any rain, and the temperatures are very high at that particular time. So they're in the thing that everybody in the EU gets a base subsidy, and then if you grow oilseed crops, you get another subsidy, and it's bigger than the first subsidy. So, their focus is to grow oilseed crops, and they just don't have the proper climate to grow soybeans.
Yes.
The people were just great. I've never experienced so many people that were just super good.
Yeah.
And I was just blessed to be able to go.
Good. Well, I'm glad you had that opportunity. It's just good to get out of our own little world sometimes, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. Yes.
But you know what's interesting, Mark? You've traveled there. A lot of us here have, but a lot of the challenges are almost identical in principle anyway. Everywhere there's challenges, everywhere there's benefits, and be able to see that and understand it, it just makes me even a deeper believer in the whole value of cover crops, that no matter where you go, there's a place for them, that they're going to help the farmer, help the soil.
After I spoke the one time, there was 4 large producers that quizzed me for 5 hours straight.
Yep.
I mean, they just drilled me till I was exhausted. And altogether, that group farmed 450,000 acres, and they were looking to change.
Yep, isn't that something?
It's just blows my mind.
Yep. Yeah, I guess for you in the scope of your operation, you felt like you were a gardener.
Yeah, I was the smallest one there.
Isn't that something? Yeah. Well, for those of you who don't know, Mark farms around 20,000 acres, so that's an understatement. Anyway, Dan, I see you have your mic on. You must have a question.
Well, yeah, I was just curious. I got in late, so apologize if this is redundant, but that discussion about soybeans out there in Hungary, what about canola? Wouldn't that be a better fit?
Yeah, that is one of their big crops. It's their, I think, number 2 crop maybe. So yeah, that is very, very popular there. So you're correct. The thing of it is they want to try soybeans to diversify a little bit, and there's a good point to that. But even my time in France, soybeans have been somewhat difficult to grow. I mean, if they get 50 bushels, 60 bushel, that's a huge yield. Now, I'm sure genetics are involved, but they are pretty far north. I mean, you look at the map and you go through France and Hungary and those areas, even Romania and then down into Bulgaria. That's all north of almost of the Corn Belt. So day length, even though they have greater day length in June and July, but it trails off quickly in the fall. And I think they're losing sunlight. I think that's part of it. So anyway, that's just, but yeah, they're definitely trying, but I would have to say genetics is also maybe another factor of trying to get some of the best genetics there. It hasn't probably occurred yet. Other questions? Anybody? Well, okay. If not, it's been just a pleasure again to have you guys on. I enjoy coming here every week, and certainly appreciate your sacrifice and time and support in this group. So look forward to seeing you next week. We'll have this thing recorded and sent out later today, hopefully, or tomorrow. In the meantime, guys, have a great Thanksgiving.
Hey, Steve.
Yeah, go ahead, Dan.
Well, again, I missed the earlier part. Could you give me and we could just talk afterwards if that would be better. But the fava beans, I'd like to kind of get up to speed. Very curious about that one, and you really peaked it with this, and I'd like to see where you think the fit is.
We have a little time here yet. I did go through that. I have a slide on that, and the thing about it is, every time I go to Europe, there's fava beans, fava beans, fava beans. There's fava beans. They're there. They're being used. The big question here, I'll say in the States, is the seed size is so large, and then that equates to the cost per acre, and the transportation cost of a per acre basis is just too high. Everybody agrees that fava beans is a great species, but the seed size has been the biggest barrier. And they are working on smaller seeds. I know of several different efforts. I actually have a few sitting on my desk here that are about the size of peas that I'm going to test early next year to see how they grow in our condition. So I think if we solve the seed size issue, it's going to bring fava beans into the equation because they can produce a boatload of nitrogen. And there's some there's some varieties now that are going to be winter hardy that'll survive. I'm just going to say basically maybe south of I-70, they may survive the winter, which opens up a fall planting. It's a pretty tough seed. I do know in France, if they sow them deep in end of November, beginning of December, if you can get in the ground, they'll pop out of the ground first thing in the spring. They say the key is to plant them 2 inches deep at that time. I'm actually going to be planting some. I want to try to do it here at the end of this week, the end of November here, just to see if I can repeat that here. So they're also very good at hosting mycorrhizae, and I showed a picture that you could see that on. But so that this is nitrogen production. It's an upright or an erect legume, which it's kind of nice. You can just add it to your mix so that peas or hairy vetch can trellis up it, and you can put some grasses in there like triticale or suryarai to do the same thing, but it's a legume that's upright. Another thing that one of the other presenters at the conference from France, a gal by the name of Sarah Singla. If you ever get to hear her, she's been to the U.S. a couple times. She's going to be at No Till in the Plains the end of January. Very, very good presenter. She has her own farm in France, and she was showing the benefits of the fava beans. When they are winter killed, they turn black, and the leaves particularly turn black. And she shows some pictures of corn that actually came up quicker where the fava beans were planted because she said the soil was a little warmer because of the blackness that it drew in sunlight. I don't think that's a big deal, but anyway, it's a plus. So that's some of the basics of fava beans.
So any opportunities for fava beans with interseeding?
Good question. We need to try it. I don't think I've ever tried them to my knowledge. At least I don't remember that I did. Because they would last till like Christmas almost in a good part of the area. It takes the mid-teens to take them out. Most average varieties, they're working on some varieties that they claim to get down to single digits to survive. I don't know. We'll see. But again, it's that big seed. That's the cost, because we haven't ramped up commercial production for cover crops with fava beans yet. And
where are they growing them per seed?
Canada is a good place to grow them here in North America. It just because they tend to attract aphids, which I've actually been some organic people have used fava beans as a deterrent in gardens, in small market gardens, to attract aphids. That being said, in a mix, you don't have to worry about aphids getting out of control. But to grow them for seed production, and I tried to do it years ago, and I just had this little tiny plot, and the aphids just come in there and just were all over them. I generally don't have aphid problems. But there again, on a very small plot, they seem to attract them in from miles around. So I think it's difficult to grow the seed except in drier climates. And fava beans are used quite extensively in the southern provinces of Canada as a protein source because they won't freeze out on a late frost or an early frost like soybeans do. Soybeans are too risky. So fava beans are a tremendous protein source. They're used in southern Canada as protein for feed. And of course, they're also used for human consumption in some countries as well. So it's certainly a very popular crop, but the seed size has caused a suppression of use in cover crop situations.
How big is the seed?
Well, when I say the small seeds, the smallest fava bean seed you can get is probably bigger than the biggest pea you'll ever see, to give you an idea. So if we can get them to 12 to 1,500 seeds per pound, that's really good. But fava beans can be 700 seeds per pound, which I don't know what to really compare that to, but I would say 2 times, 3 times as big as a pea. And you have to plant like 100 pounds per acre then. And that's just prohibitive. That's like a single species. So that's where it's at. That's pretty much where it's at. So, do you have any questions, Jen? I see you're still on. Anything else, Dan?
Yeah, can you tell me, how did they come up with the name, they call it Hungary? That seems a strange name for a country.
I don't know. I thought of asking that a couple times, but I got to tell you one thing, Dan, I did not go hungry.
I bet you didn't.
I love the food, and no problem there. I don't know. I guess there's an answer somewhere. I'll just say go Google it and find out. I don't know the answer.
I'll get back to you.
There you go. Let us know. Yeah, okay. Well, hey, thanks a lot. Appreciate everyone's involvement here, and have a happy Thanksgiving. And we'll plan to be back next week. Thanks a lot.